Welcome back to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I hope you're all having a great day. I've got a very special guest joining us, and I think one of our most special guests because it's been a while since we last spoke. I think Kevork Almassian was one of the first guests that we had on our show 1 year ago. Well, today's the 9th, so we started the show 1 year and 2 days ago. And Kevork predicted exactly what was going to happen in Syria on one of those first episodes, months before it actually took place. I mean, he was saying it even earlier than that, but really predicted everything that was going to happen when a lot of people were not focused on what was going down in Syria. And you said that there's going to be a new concerted effort, a new push by these Al-Qaeda thugs against the Assad government, and it could be very bad. And very sadly, that's exactly what took place. So, Kevork, thank you so much for joining us again. You are a visionary. Unfortunately, you're correct about these events. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much, Jackson. I'm doing well. I don't consider myself a visionary. I think I'm a realist. And we, as political analysts, we should connect the dots and connect between history and the present. And I think the region, some people try to say it's so complicated, but at the same time, it's also very predictable. So this is what many, I would argue, the think tankers, the experts, tried to distort the realities in the region in order to achieve regime change regardless of the consequences, because the people of the region is the last in their interests. They don't really care about the people. And now that the regime change happened, you see that these people try to downplay the atrocities committed against the Syrian people by the Jolani regime. Meanwhile, when Assad was in power, there was this microscope focusing on the Syrian case in order to achieve that regime change.
I will say, though, that there's been a number of people who were, openly supporting regime change in Syria who have since come out and admitted that they were wrong, and that that this obviously has led to the expansion of the Greater Israel Project, and that's what I first want to ask you about. We saw Jolani, the president, quote unquote, of Syria. He was in Manhattan last week, and he had meetings with a lot of people. We'll talk about Petraeus in a little bit, but he met the Jewish Congress president. I forget his name off the top of my head. He's one of Netanyahu's top billionaire allies in the United States. At what stage is this normalization with Israel in right now? What are the talks like? As I understand, they were very close to striking a deal, and then something happened. So do you expect this to progress further?
I think a normalization deal between Syria and Israel is a possibility in the next 2 years. I have predicted this the 2 days after the regime change happened, because in the past 14 years, the packaging of the Syrian war was always in humanitarian terms. So they sugarcoated it in human rights and democracy. But the core of the issue was that Bashar himself rejected several times American and also Arabic offers to him to distance himself from what used to be called the axis of resistance. And why I say what used to be called the axis of resistance, because Syria was the hub, the chain which connected these different state and non-state actors in the region who were against the American and Israeli hegemony over the region. Now, once Syria was gone, the chain has crumbled, and you see that Hezbollah was forced to localize itself to protect its community. It no longer can go into a regional conflict, let's say, against the Israelis. The Palestinians nowadays accepted the ceasefire agreement, which requires them to release all the hostages, which was a leverage card in their hands to negotiate for a better deal. Now that they will release all the hostages, I think the Israelis will violate the ceasefire agreement and they will continue the onslaught against the Palestinians. And we see that Iran also lost some of its influence in the region because it no longer has an access to the Mediterranean, no longer has this connectivity between Tehran, Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut, in order to exert its leverage over Israel or over the United States. So, of course, Syria was a very important player. It was downplayed by many experts, and because many experts also in the West, Jackson, they are Orientalist, the way they see the region. They think Syria is somehow separate from Palestine and Syria is separate from Lebanon. Those are all artificial borders. There is the Levant, you have the West Asia, and these countries are interconnected through different means: economic, political, family relationship, culture, language, etc. And Syria for a long time played, in my opinion, a pivotal role in this Arab-Israeli conflict. And once Syria is gone, you see that the chain has been broken, and different players decided to back off 1 or 2 steps back in order to preserve themselves and try to prepare for a better strategy in the future. But I believe this Iran-led, let's say, axis of resistance has failed for the moment. And in the future, they have to think about a different approach because, unfortunately, the region is infected with sectarianism. And Qatar and Saudi Arabia have been very strong players with the petrodollar they have and all the influence over the media outlets. They're pouring billions of dollars into the press, NGOs, to increase these sectarian tensions in the region, which goes in the interests of Israel. And once that happens, you see that when Hezbollah intervened in support of the Palestinians, and when their leadership was being assassinated, many people in the region who are pro-Palestine were celebrating the assassinations of the Hezbollah leadership. Meanwhile, they themselves were glorifying the leadership of the Palestinians. This tells you something, that sectarian lines, unfortunately, is still playing a major factor in the people's vision of the region. Without, let's say, a pan-Arabist or without a patriotic movement in the region, I think, and without a national identity that combines these different players in the region, I think it will fail again. As long as these Israelis, basically, they killed all the left-wing, socialist, Marxist movements in the 70s and the 80s because they wanted to empty the scene for more, let's say, Islamic movements, because once Islamic movements weigh in, you could say those are terrorists, especially after 9/11, right? And you would no longer recognize them as legitimate players to negotiate with or agree to give them a state. So you see in the 70s, the Palestinians were the resistance, Palestinian resistance, whether political, cultural, or even armed struggle, they were all coming from the left or from the nationalists. Now it is mostly Islamic, and this gives, in my opinion, the Israelis the perfect enemy to come and say, those are the jihadists, this is what they call them, right? And we cannot negotiate with them, and they can kill as many as they want to without blinking of an eye, with, of course, the complicity of the United States. However, we have to reiterate this point. While Israelis say the Palestinians are jihadists, they're the ones negotiating with the Jolani regime, the real jihadists, like you mentioned now, right? And the Jolani regime, in my opinion, is very open to normalization. The Israelis, of course, achieved several things in southern Syria. They have created a 60 to 80 kilometers long buffer zone. There are no hard weapons, for example, heavy weapons for the Jolani regime on the south of Damascus. Israel completely eliminated it. They have established an aerial dominance in the south and the no-fly zone over the south. The only thing that they disagreed for now is the destiny of Asweda Governorate. Asweda Governorate is a Syrian majority Druze, and after the genocidal, let's say, massacres, why I say genocidal, because the intent of killing them based on their ethnicity and religion was present, and we saw it in endless videos. The people and the leadership in Asweda said, we no longer want to be part of this terrorist regime, and whoever comes and saves us, we will accept it. So in my opinion, both sides fell into the trap. The Jolani regime fell into the trap because in Baku, probably they misunderstood the Israelis. 2 days before these massacres, they were in Baku talking to the Israelis, and they came to Syria and committed these massacres. And the Druze, in my opinion, also fell into the trap because the Israelis do not care about them. The Israelis care about their geographical, let's say, expansionism inside Syria, and they're using them as a card to expand inside Syria, similarly with other minorities. And I know this for a fact because nowadays in Europe, in the United States, there are many political, let's say, gatherings and entities being formulated mostly by Syrian minorities. And the Israelis are trying very hard to talk to them, to connect with them, including myself. I know it as a first-hand experience that they come and tell you, look, you are influential and you have a big platform and you are from the minority in Syria and the Assad regime is gone. This is what they're telling you. So let's cooperate against the Jolani regime. But I'm not fool. And I know that the Israelis have enabled this outcome and they helped bring Jolani to power in order to create these security conditions against the minorities so that the minorities would resort to Israel as a protector. But Israeli hospitals were full of the Jolani soldiers and terrorists when they were being killed and injured by the Syrian army. And they used to go to the Golan Heights to take refuge and take medical care by the Israeli hospitals and cash money and light weapons and come back to Syria to continue the fight against the Syrian army. So Israel is, of course, a main player which brought Jolani to power, in addition, of course, to Qatar and Turkey. And the American administration do not want to intervene into all the details in Syria. They say, here is Tom Barak, let him fix this issue with Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And whatever you agree, we accept it because they have a bigger issues to take care of, like in Ukraine. They're also getting ready for Iran, and also beyond that, China.
What is the answer for the Druze? Damned if they do, damned if they don't. I feel like the only possibility is really for them to take up arms and try to defend themselves within the existing framework of the Syrian state as it is. I mean, they can't go to Israel. It's not a good situation at all either way, but I feel like it's you can only hope that they create some bastion of, I guess, power or dignity and respect that will be forced upon the Jolani state and will have to be tolerated.
I remember one footage, Jackson, from these massacres against the Syrian Druze in Sweda. The Jolani thugs, they put a man in his late 50s, early 60s at gunpoint, and they're asking him, are you a Muslim or are you a Druze? Are you a Muslim or are you a Druze? And he said, brother, I'm Syrian. And they said, so you're a Druze. And they killed him. Many of them, they were shooting him. And many people in Sweda, including I have friends and whom I have met during my university studies, and also people contact me. They're from the Druze community, whether in the diaspora or in Syria, and they say countless of footages like this on their smartphones have urged them to believe that they're no longer Syrians, that they cannot be part of such a state which says we are the Syrian Arab Republic. Meanwhile, their soldiers coming and asking us the simple question, are you Druze or are you Muslim? But the Druze are also considered part of the Muslim communities in Syria, or were considered under the Assad government. Now that the Jolani comes to power, this is what many people miss. The Jolani is also a very ideological person, and they believe in the Ibn Taymiyyah's teachings, whose books were completely banned in Syria under the Assad government, and now it is everywhere, basically in the streets, you can read it. And Ibn Taymiyyah says, this was 800 years ago, that once an Islamic state is established, the Islamic forces should purify their domestic home from the apostates and from the infidels. And the apostates according to him, are the Alawites, the Shiites, and the Druze. And once they purify the domestic house from these minorities and others, of course, Yazidis, etc., they would come then after the Christians. And then they would come after the Jews. So this is an endless conflict. This will bring an endless conflict in the region with the mentality of Jolani governing Damascus, because the power, the dynamo, let's say, driving this regime is sectarian hatred against others. But notice how they don't fight against Israel. Israel is advancing inside Syria. They don't shoot on Israel, but I mean, under international law, they have the right to shoot on Israel, right? Because Israel is on Syrian territory. And they have received a lot of American Tau rockets, Tau missiles in the past, right? So where are they? They have destroyed tens, probably hundreds of Syrian tanks with American Tau missiles. But once Israel rolled into Syria, what happened to the Tau missiles? Have they swallowed them? We haven't seen not even once Jolani shooting on Israeli tanks, but they have all the power and all the strength to go after armless, let's say, civilians and kill them. So they have really pushed the people to the corner. And I said this on one of my streams, even if the shaitan comes now and says, I will protect you, these people who are persecuted by Jolani, they will accept it because they are at gunpoint and people resort to the ugliest options to preserve their soul and preserve themselves. But I would also say this was a situation this situation was paved by Israel itself. They wanted for this to happen because this was a golden opportunity for them to weigh in and say, here is my hand, let's talk and let's make peace. And this is happening with the Druze. It already happened with the Kurds. And now they're trying to reach out to the Alawites in the coastal cities. And I want to make a big disclaimer. I'm also one of the minorities, and I'm in no way or shape will be or would be or could be in such a coalition, because we have studied Operation Timber Sycamore, and were it not for the Israeli lobbying in Washington, D.C., this Operation Timber Sycamore, which led to the regime change in Syria, would not have seen light. This was a neocon Zionist project in Syria, and they have destroyed Syria for the sake of destroying the axis of resistance, let's say. And once that happened, now they come and present themselves as saviors. No, I don't believe so.
And Jolani was also, when he was in Manhattan, he met with David Petraeus, former CIA director. Petraeus said, your success is our success, when he was speaking with Jolani. Could you explain the overlap? Because you did a brilliant thread on Twitter explaining the overlap of Petraeus as his time as a U.S. commander in Mosul and Jolani's time in Mosul, and how they actually overlapped there. Different sides, I guess, technically, but the same forces were backing them up.
And the coincidence is, Jackson, that they released Jolani in March 2011. And what was the month that the so-called Syrian revolution started? It was March 2011. And Baghdadi sent Jolani to Syria to basically start Jabhat al-Nusra Front, the offshoot of Al-Qaeda in Syria. And in late 2011, American Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, they have prepared an evaluation of the situation in Syria, and they sent it to Barack Obama, telling him basically the driving force behind the insurgency in Syria are the sectarians, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and the Salafists. This is what they say in the report. And based on the evaluation, Obama decided to continue with the Operation Timber Sycamore, but they have created a smokescreen, let's say, saying we have the radicals, but also the moderate rebels. So who are the moderate rebels? Those are the ones that we train in Turkey and Jordan, and we send them to Syria. But this was a parallel army, basically, consists of so-called moderate rebels. But these moderate rebels were embedded directly with Jabhat al-Nusra, giving them their own weapons and sharing them the weapons, the ammunition, the expertise, etc. And they have fought shoulder to shoulder, even with ISIS. Until 2013, the so-called Free Syrian Army, armed and trained by the CIA in two joint operation rooms in Turkey and Jordan, were fighting with ISIS together in Aleppo. The rift started when Jolani and Baghdadi had a disagreement. Because, in the region, it's always, there is also the political competition between leaderships. Just like the Baathists had rifts among themselves, that doesn't mean they differed in the ideology, but they had also personal competition and regional competition among themselves, similarly between ISIS and al-Nusra. And since then, the Free Syrian Army has allied itself with Jabhat al-Nusra against ISIS. But this was not an organic animosity. It was more a political disagreement between these parties who will control where, and especially the places where we have carbohydrates, we have water, we have fuel, we have phosphate, we have lots of wealth in Syria. And one of which I would like to mention that, for example, when ISIS used to occupy a territory in Homs and Raqqa, where a French Lavarge company had its factories. And this factory said, come Habibi, let's make a deal. We pay you money, you don't target us, we continue operating here, and we give you free cement so you can build your fortifications. So there was a lot of money as well in the Syrian war, including the fuel. I mean, ISIS occupied the fuel oil fields in Syria. And where did they sell the oil? To Turkey. And the son of Erdogan, Bilal, was responsible of this file. So in this case, I think that Islamic State, between quotations, they have become more independent since they occupied the oil fields. And Jabhat al-Nusra also wanted to occupy those oil fields. So this was the disagreement between them. Now, Petraeus comes and says that your success is our success. This is a really honest and truthful statement, in my opinion. Al-Qaeda has been a contract army for the US, especially on the leadership level, starting from Afghanistan into Libya, into Syria, and also in Yemen. Everywhere we look, Al-Qaeda stands on the opposite side of the enemies of the US. It doesn't have to be on the same side of the US, but they are always on the opposite side of the enemies of the United States. Iran, Hezbollah, Gaddafi, Assad, and even in Palestine, in Gaza, the ISIS, there was a small ISIS group in Gaza, and they stood against Hamas, right? So in this case, I think there is a track record that we can really connect the dots and see that at least on the leadership level, especially that we see now that Jolani has been a long asset for the CIA with the confession of Petraeus, and also James Jeffrey, who was the former American envoy to Syria, who said Jolani's army is an asset to the US strategy in Syria. So we have Robert Ford, the former US ambassador to Syria, saying that I trained Jolani to take him out of the terrorist world and become a politician. The MI6, Tony Blair's organization, NGO, I think the leader or the head of this organization is Jonathan Powell, the former head of office of Tony Blair. They're the ones having an office in the presidential palace of Syria. They have a woman working in the presidential palace of Syria now, guiding Jolani on what to say, what statement to be written, and how to act with the press. So we have at least the MI6 and the CIA have been at least embedded with these Al-Qaeda forces in Syria and the Muslim Brotherhood forces in Syria to bring them to power. And this has been a long strategy since the mid-1920s in Egypt, started with Hassan al-Banna back then, to start a rift in the anti-colonial forces, among the anti-colonial forces in Egypt. And they then pushed them against Jamal Abdel Nasser, against Hafez al-Assad, and now finally they reached to power. I think this will be very, very dangerous because these forces will definitely are very chaotic and very radicalized, that probably on the leadership level, you can compromise them. But on the popular level, the people who are fighting with Jolani, Baghdadi, and other terrorist forces are complete brainless psychopaths. And they will turn against their masters sooner or later, or they would probably kill even Jolani, because Jolani said, once we reach to Damascus, our next step is in Jerusalem. And once he came to Damascus, yes, probably the next stage to Jerusalem, but as a normalizer and not as a liberator.
Yes, he'll be greeted kindly and warmly. I do have one final question for you, because as I understand, there's democracy now in Syria, and they have these elections, and we're not supposed to ask questions about who's not allowed to vote and how the elections are actually working, and why 70 or so parliamentarians were already pre-selected. But there's democracy in Syria now. So explain what is going on with these elections, and what is the aim here? Is the aim to be able to just slap the word democracy on it, and then that way all the people who were championing the sanctions on Syria for the past however many years, decade plus, they can now come in and say, well, now we have to remove the sanctions?
Jackson, there is this meme, the guy standing in front of a cupboard and trying to explain a conspiracy theory or a situation behind him. I really have to go to that posture to explain to you this democracy in Syria, because the People's Assembly, we don't have a parliament, we have a People's Assembly. But the funny thing is, the people didn't participate in these elections. So 70 members of the People's Assembly are directly selected by Jolani. And then Jolani formed committees which create subcommittees in every governorate in Syria, except for Sweda and eastern shore of the Euphrates. So the Kurds and the Druze are excluded from these elections. And these committees, which selected subcommittees, consist of 7,000 people, and these 7,000 people, they elect the rest of the People's Assembly members. So basically, everyone in the People's Assembly are directly or indirectly selected by Jolani himself, and the people didn't participate in these elections. But the people who were actively pushing for regime change, I'm talking about Syrians, right? Human rights activists, people who receive prizes from the US administration, they work with USAID-funded NGOs who were like very open about how beautiful democracy is. They were in Syria celebrating these elections, which is mind-boggling. You could have some integrity. You should, at least a little bit. I mean, you could say, look, I support the regime change, but I don't agree with all the mechanisms of these elections. Like some integrity, some dignity, But no, like you see, people talk about democracy on one hand and then take selfies with Jolani, right? I think I have lost respect to many, many people, including people who taught me about politics because they were my professors, basically. And I had people who I used to look up to when I was younger to see, wow, these people are like excelling politics. Look how they speak to the press, And now you see them in the second row with Jolani. And these people, I had personal relationship with them. Unfortunately, this hurts me because I thought that at the end of the day, as much as we could disagree in politics, but there are certain headlines that we shouldn't disagree, right? One of which is we shouldn't have a president who was the deputy leader of ISIS. I think this is this is a simple thing to ask. If you remove Assad, Syria had a lot of educated people or people who were able to at least bring a political system which could give everyone its right, all the components of the society, right? And political liberalization and press liberalization, whatever you want to do. Regime change has already happened. Let's put geopolitics aside, but at least let the people alone, let them live, right? And this is what we haven't received. We have received someone like Jolani, whose resume is, if we compare him with Osama bin Laden, he could Osama bin Laden could look like a Sunday teacher, right, in some church. So I think Syrians, first and foremost, should blame themselves for what happened to their country, because people were dishonest with what they want. They said we want democracy and human rights, and once the regime change happened, they ran after Jolani because they're opportunists and they want to get whatever they can from this system, from political benefits, financial benefits. And I know it because those people are riding Rolls Royces nowadays in Washington and New York with very fancy lifestyle. Meanwhile, they are exporting Jolani to the Syrian people, and the Syrian people mostly are under his grip. Now, don't confuse all these supporters of Jolani on social media with his true popular base. His true popular base in Syria, probably 20%. The rest are afraid to speak. These people are killers, assassins. I have a friend in Aleppo who was a doctor, a Muslim Syrian Sunni doctor, and because he criticized Jolani on social media, and he was a very anti-Assad personality, everybody knew him, they came to his clinic and they assassinated him. So nobody can speak under such circumstances. If you let the people speak now, or come and give weapons to the Alawites now, and to the Druze, to the Kurds, to the moderate Sunnis, and to the people, to the other 80%, Jolani regime would fall in a matter of few days. But the problem is that he has the exclusivity, let's say, of acquiring weapons, and the rest are very terrified of someone who has shown to the people what he can do, especially after the March massacres against the Alawites and then the September massacres against the Druze.
Kevork Almassian, thank you so much. I said you were 100% correct. Doesn't even matter what I say. You were proven 100% correct the last time we spoke. I hope you're not proven correct about all this stuff, but I think you and I both know that that's exactly what's going to happen, everything you just said. So everyone be sure to follow Kevork on Twitter. We'll have his Twitter linked in the description above, and also check out Syrian Analysis, his YouTube program. I'm surprised they haven't banned you there yet. So, God willing, it stays up. Yes. You can only tell the truth for so long, but
yeah,
doing a great job on YouTube. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Jackson, for the opportunity.